Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Canadian Football Central, CFL content for the fans, by the fans. And we are here doing our mid-season report on the Toronto Argonauts. And I'm very, very glad to announce that we have Nick from the Argo Bounce on as our special guest today. Thanks for joining us, Nick.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, guys. Happy to be here and looking forward. Always enjoy talking Argonauts football with such passionate fans like yourself and everybody else who's listening today.
Absolutely. And it's funny because I mentioned this before we went live, but I was saying I need to bring some attention to the man who loves to wear yellow, who is currently wearing blue, with the Ticat peering over him, looking like it's ready to punch him out.
Hey, when a certain Argo fan that me and Nick both know sees this, he's gonna take a screenshot and he's gonna post.
Is this the one that this is the one I'm thinking of, right?
Yes, it is the one that you're thinking of, Mr. Connor Suve.
Oh, okay. Well, you went from the Argo fan we wouldn't name to the Argo fan we did name. Well, okay, great.
Everyone knows Connor. But yeah, he's going to hold me at gunpoint and be like, oh my God, he's wearing Argo merch.
Now,
it's like Argo Sammy and Ticat Sammy. You're repping both sides at once. I don't know how some fans are going to feel about that, but we don't judge.
Exactly. So the Argos have had, I think it's fair to say they've had a bit of a mixed season in terms of games where they've performed pretty well. Cameron Dukes has looked like he's been a real starting quarterback in the league. And then there have been games where, you know what, I see why he was a backup. And so it's the Argos are in a bit of a strange spot. They're third in the East right now. Still got a 4-point lead on the Ticats. Ticats still just trying to kind of get their season going. Similar to kind of like Winnipeg over in the West. But with the Argonauts, this will be a very interesting game, them going in this week, because they'll be facing Calgary, and they both have basically tied for the exact same record. How do you feel about, and not necessarily about that game, but how do you feel about kind of the Argonauts season as a whole kind of leading up to this point?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because when I look at how they've played this season, and particularly in the games they've lost, with the exception of maybe the Montreal game at home, where it was pretty clear that Montreal was the better team for the duration on both sides of the football. Really, all the other games they've lost, it seems like they had a chance to win it. You look at the Saskatchewan, the Hamilton games, they got in holes early. They committed some mistakes that they were trailing from behind. You look at the Calgary game where they just blew up in the second half and just got away from what was leading them to be so successful in the first half. So to me, it really seems like this is a team that could really be, 6-1 right now, just like they were last year. And in part, it's because the bar was set so high last year. Yeah. The team going 16-2, you kind of forget that isn't normal for any team, and especially for Argonaut fans who haven't seen that kind of sustained success for a long time. Absolutely. Like even when I was a kid, I look at like 2004 when they won the Grey Cup, and they were kind of mediocre after that. 2012 they won, and then they failed to make the playoffs they lost the East Final in Hamilton in 2013, and then regressed, and then 2017 they win the Grey Cup, and then they're abysmal the next 2 years, especially with the injury to Ricky Ray. So we haven't really experienced that as a fan base for a long time. So that's what I think's kind of set the bar really high now going in. So it's like all the games are definitely winnable, that even the ones they've lost. And then of course you have the Winnipeg game where they were probably not the better team, but managed to squeak an overtime win out of it. So they're in a really weird spot. But, I think they can definitely in the second half turn it up a gear like they did in 22 or 23 when they won the Grey Cup that year. Yeah. 22.
Yeah, that would have been 22. But yeah, no, it's very interesting just because it's being a team that, like, it's crazy to think, like, looking at a team that's 4-4, it's crazy to think, like, 2 years ago, they won the Grey Cup. But there's a few things, because obviously the Chad Kelly being missing has absolutely hurt this team a lot. Oh, yeah. This is your starting quarterback gone. Like, this is the guy who, this is the guy in charge of that offense, really. And so one of the other things that I will say that is very, very important to mention is that the Argonauts were one of those teams, kind of similar to Winnipeg actually, that they endured a lot of losses in the offseason. There was a lot of guys that left, and there was a lot more going out than coming back in. Now, one of the things that you guys have there that I sorely miss here over in Winnipeg is Mr. Janarian Grant, the returner that he is, that I've always appreciated him in Winnipeg. He had kind of been. It's funny because he was here when he was a lot younger, and he had kind of once we had lost Lucky Whitehead going to BC, Janarian Grant finally took over. And you could see that he took a lot of, if you look at Lucky Whitehead when he was a returner back then in the 2019 season, and even in the 2020 season over in BC, and you look at the way the Janarian Grant played these past few years in Winnipeg and the way he's now excelling this year in Toronto, it's one of those things where, in my opinion, he's been a really, really key performer in the sense of that even when the team hasn't been able to put up the points that it should to be able to win, being able to get touchdowns on special teams is a huge thing to have on your team, because it's such a small thing that can make such a big difference in the sense of the vast majority of the game. You're either playing offense or defense. You're not playing nearly as much special teams. But if you're able to capitalize and get the most out of it whenever on their field, that I think that's huge. And so it's one of those things where it's like, how can, when he's able to give you that field position, or when he's able to get those points, being able to then follow up on that and continue that is definitely what is key. And Toronto has had mixed results with that. Now, looking at kind of the offense of this team, how do you feel about this offense as a whole? And we're going to start with probably the interior. We're going to start with probably the offensive line along with the running backs.
Yeah, looking at it, the offensive line, I thought actually has been, for the most part, pretty good, particularly with the run blocking has been one of the strong suits, even back in training camp when they played the Hamilton Tiger Cats in the game at Guelph. It seemed to me like they were just able to walk all over them and just push their defensive linemen, linebackers out of the way and move the ball down the field any time they wanted, especially with Kadeem Carey. One of the funny things that kind of was a story at the beginning of the year was with such a good performance by guys like Cameron Dukes, a great running by Kadeem Carey. It sort of made you forget about guys who they got rid of, like AJ Ouellette, who was running beforehand, so that they were able to, despite having a new look, they were still able to move the ball effectively the same way they did the season before. Now that we're kind of later on into the year, we've seen that teams have been able to adjust to cover that, namely for Carey, because he doesn't have quite the same amount of raw power as Ouellette did, but they're still backed up by a very good offensive line. And we saw that kind of the reverse of it happened in Saskatchewan, where Ouellette has sometimes kind of struggled because the O-line in Saskatchewan isn't quite as good. This past week, if you're just looking at it in how it was last week against Calgary, we saw a couple of times there were some struggles with pass blocking, particularly in that second half. And I know there was one in particular where it seemed like the offense either didn't get the signal or they thought someone jumped and it was going to be a procedure, but the play kept going. Yeah. There was a lot of miscommunication like that I think really threw the offensive line out in that game. I mean, giving up 6 sacks and getting none of your own is not a good look for any offensive unit. So overall, though, I think the O-line is still one of the best components of this team, and it's what's led them to be so successful in the last couple seasons. I think where you'll see it maybe change, particularly if Chad Kelly comes back, the way that everything offensively has sort of been schemed up is to Chad Kelly's abilities as a good pocket passer, strong arm, can still run, but doesn't rely on it. Whereas for someone like Cam Dukes, he doesn't have that same power to throw the ball deep down the field. And I think sometimes the play calling doesn't necessarily play to those kind of strengths.
It doesn't complement his game.
Yeah, exactly. Where I think if you could, I mentioned this with Chris on Tuesday, if you plugged in maybe a little bit more RPOs to sort of get the defenses to bite one way and then move the other, and even running the same play, but instead of handing it off, now you throw a swing pass or a pitch to a wide receiver or something. Just Absolutely. Little things like that maybe might be more suited to Dukes' game. And of course, this week the challenge now is that Dukes is a game time decision. He might not even play, and he's certainly going to be second string to Arbuckle this week.
I was about to say, I heard Arbuckle was a starter.
So now that looking ahead, that kind of affects how you're going to run the playbook, and Arbuckle's probably more suited to the offensive scheme. So we'll see what comes of it this week.
Yeah, no, it's funny because this video will actually be coming out after that game has happened. That game is happening on Friday. We are recording this on the Thursday, but we got so many we got a few that are already recorded, so we're doing one per day. So this will probably be coming out probably the Saturday or the Sunday, I think. I can't remember the exact day, but
it'll be fun. It'll be fun to look back on and
exactly see if we look like fools, huh? Who knows? Like here, Rick, I'll let you.
Nick, do you guys have the same offensive line this year that you guys had last year?
Yeah, for the most part, I think pretty much everything's the same. Trevion Tate, at right tackle, he left. He's on Calgary now, who we played last week, and we play this week, of course. But yeah, I think, well, right now, Gregor McKellar he got injured this last game. So he's on the 6-game injured list now. But for the most part, Cage, Hunter, Nicastro, Darius Sirocco's been on the 6 games since the year began, so he's one of the changes. Van Dahl, I believe, is new this year, and Dejon Allen's the same as well. So with the exception of one lineman, they've got the same 4 of the 5 that they had last season on their interior. And then if you're looking at kind of the run blocking, they just released Albert Awashe 2 days ago. So now they've lost a run blocker in him.
Yeah.
So I know there's a difference between Kelly's play and Cameron Duke's play with how, I would say inconsistent that he's been this year. What would you say is, would you say it's inconsistent? Because, they had so much success. Okay, because I know you can't say Kelly's one of the reasons why they were so good last year. But with the same pretty much offensive line last year, you would think that they would almost have not the same success because of the different quarterbacks, but almost
something more comparable.
Something more comparable than what we've seen so far this year.
Yeah, it's a good question because and you can even tie the receivers in on that too, because I
was about to say we should probably if we're talking about differences and whatnot in our teams, I think that would be probably where to go next. Yeah.
Yeah, well, if you look at wide receivers, a lot of the receiving core, especially now that guys have come back, like David Ungerer, a lot of the receivers are the same as they were for Kelly, as they were under Dukes, and some of it may come that they just don't have the same kind of. Last season, of course, Chad Kelly had more reps with those guys as opposed to someone like Cam Dukes. But on the other hand, I think since the BC game, I don't think they've had a wide receiver get more than 100 yards receiving off passes. So I think the struggle just comes with the ability to read the open wide receivers, particularly on the second and third read. There's a lot of times where Cam Dukes is kind of keyed in on the one guy as sort of the main target for the play, and then is looking over, seeing that he's covered, and then isn't really sure on the plan B or the plan C.
You can't play like that. You don't have time. Even with a great offensive line, that's why I'm trying to remember, I think it was Nathan Rourke, they were saying that his strategy when he plays quarterback is right when he gets, we're going to say the Pepsi is the football, right when he gets that football and he goes to step back into his pocket. Each step he's taking back, he's checking across the field, and he's going from the short routes to the far routes. And if in the second he sees anything, got to go then. And that's one reason why Nathan Rourke was so successful, in the sense of that you had a good offensive line in front of him. But even if the offensive line was terrible, he threw that ball so quickly a lot of the time that it just didn't really matter. And look at where he is now. A lot of people, upset that he's not in the CFL, but it's because he's moved on to playing in the NFL, and that's not because he's a weak player. That's because he was too good in a sense. And so when I look at kind of this receiving core, the first thing I have to ask as a Bomber fan, what is the situation with Rasheed Bailey? I was really enjoying my boy in Winnipeg. We lose him in Toronto, and then Toronto cuts him.
Yeah, I mean, looking at it, I think a lot, particularly with Rashid Bailey, the problem was that they have Tavares Daniels, DeMonte Coxey, and Janarian Grant all in the lineup as well. And I think, although Rashid Bailey at the time has had some of the better receiving statistics among the Argonauts receivers, the challenge is, do you get you kind of need to cut one with return of other guys, mostly Canadians, because we run a very Canadian heavy receiver core.
Yep.
So you have Kevin Mittal, Richie Danny,
but they
David
didn't bring
Unger.
in anyone, at least as far as I'm concerned. Unless did they
Well, Unger was one of the guys that came off on the injured list.
Okay,
Kevin Mittal came off on the injured list.
Oh, I see.
So
coming off injury lists as
so
opposed
then
to
it's
signing
like,
guys. Oh, okay, I see.
Yeah, so it's like, who do you get rid of? You're not going to get rid of Janarian Grant because he's already got a couple.
Because he's so valuable on special teams too.
Exactly.
He's such a dual use.
And Grant has seen some good plays offensively as well. And then
we didn't use him offensively. He was pretty much just special teams for us.
Yeah. And then like Coxey and Daniels, I mean, I know their stats haven't been quite as good this year, but especially with the potential of what might happen with Kelly coming back, you don't want to lose either of those guys.
Want to keep the chemistry.
Yeah, so unfortunately Bailey was unfortunately the guy who had to go. Just
he was the odd man out.
All the cap room. Yeah, exactly. So
no, that makes sense. It makes sense when you put it that way. Just because it's one of those things where it's easy from a Winnipeg perspective, where we love this guy and we tried so hard to keep him, and a lot of times, and then it was just like, wait, a team just got rid of him willingly? Like I was like, what? Like this doesn't make any sense. So it makes a lot more sense when you kind of break it down in that regard.
Has anyone even signed him yet? I don't think they have.
No, he's not been signed. It's funny. I've talked about Winnipeg signing him, but it's one of those things where it looks like Kenny Lawler might be coming off the injury list soon for Winnipeg. So we will. So I think the Bombers are probably waiting to see the status of him and with some of the guys on the injury list before they necessarily go and throw the money at him.
Listen, I'm willing to risk one of our vets off of our defense who can't play worth crap just to make him come over to the black and gold.
No, you already have O'Leary Orange. You don't need any more Bomber receivers.
Hey, he's already on the 6th game, so.
Well, Hamilton and Edmonton right now are pretty known for taking all the Argonaut has-beens. So
it's funny because we were talking last night. And Carter was shocked when we were doing the Winnipeg video last night that they have, what did I say, 14 people?
14 people on the injured list, and 13 of them are on the 6th game.
Okay, well, Toronto has 12 to 13 just on the 6th game alone, and that was including this week's list. Yep, so you guys have the most in the West, and they have the most in the East.
Yeah, all 12 of our guys on the injured list for coming into this game. I have the depth chart here, so that's how I know. They're all on the 6th game, and then depending on what happens with Duke, Sopik, and Adebaboy, who are all game time decisions, you could count that as 1 game injuries as well.
Yeah, I feel like I'm like the clip from like Family Guy of like Peter Griffin when he's got like the cast on like his entire body. It's like I feel like that's like Winnipeg right now. It's just
you put everyone in bubble wrap.
Little bit of injuries. Yeah, well, you know what you need? You ever seen like those little like they're not the hamster balls, but the ones they got the little handles in the middle and they run into each other? It's like they need some of those.
they have the hamster wheel at halftime or not at halftime, but during the Argonauts games.
It's the bubble wrap one.
We have one at Bomber games too.
Yeah, so it's like that's exactly the thing the players need. Have a full game with them in those.
Okay, so Nick, here's a question for you. So you can pick 2 people on either side, but who would you say is your shock of the season, and who would you say is your kind of disappointment? And you can pick
compared
a couple
to expectation.
Yes.
Oh yeah, those are some good questions. I think I'm not gonna pick guys who've been injured because I think that's really
out of their control.
But yeah, I think the big pleasant surprise so far, I could name a couple people defensively, but I really think particularly with this last game, Royce Metier is a really good example. Like he was a good defensive back last year. Don't get me wrong, but especially this past game with the injuries to Wyndham McManus, so now you're kind of down your defensive leader. Metche was one of the guys who really stepped up in commanding the defense and had the forced fumble and the interception in that first half of that game. So he's one guy who I would say has to be one of the biggest. Like the guy who's playing unbelievable right now is my top pick for biggest surprise. I think if we're looking at probably biggest shock, disappointment, probably DeVaris Daniels right now, because like last game, he didn't have a single reception, was only targeted twice. This was a guy who was probably the Argonauts' best wide receiver last year. And I mean, it kind of feeds into what we've already talked about with receivers struggling.
Yeah.
Daniels just is one in particular, I think, because he was the top dog last year. To see him struggle has kind of been a little frustrating to watch. And I mean, you could talk about it, the receiving core as a whole because of it. So that would probably be what I would say. And then I guess the other thing I could say is maybe this right now, the defensive line has been a little bit problematic right now these last couple games with their inability to generate sacks. I had the game notes for the second Toronto Calgary game here, and it was looking at the sack differential. And right now Calgary has 14, has taken 12, so +2 differential. Toronto's -4, which means they've given up 4 more sacks than they've gotten this year, 22-18. So I think and they had 0 last night or last week, giving up 6 to Calgary. So I'm hoping one thing that's going to change if I'm looking at sort of a unit as a whole. But like at the beginning of the season, we were all critical of the secondary, but the secondary has now been probably their strength on defense.
It feels like we were talking about this last night during the Elks one, but it feels like the CFL has gone through a switch partway through the season where the problems for teams at the very start of the season have now become the strengths, and the strengths have become the weaknesses, in the sense of we're talking about a league that near the start of the season was very, very offense heavy, and then seemingly has kind of fallen out of that in favor of more of a defensive and kicking game. We've seen so many of those, whether it was Edmonton versus Ottawa, which is God's most boring football game that he gifted to Canada, and then like even like I'm not gonna lie, I love that we beat BC 25-0. If you're not a Bomber fan, you hate this game. That game is like watching paint dry. There is nothing. There was.
I mean, you guys only had 1 touchdown. Then it's just like,
yes, and it was Lucky Whitehead. So yeah. God is good. I'm convinced. And
Castillo could have just won that game himself.
He pretty much. Well, we gotta give credit to that defense. Now, actually on the topic of defense, I want to know your opinion on this. So obviously, at the end of last season, it's pretty much in Saskatchewan. The coaching race is down to Buck Pierce and Corey Mace. And so then it's pretty much guaranteed that either Winnipeg or Toronto is going to have to do some work in terms of filling that hole in their coaching staff. Corey Mace gets the job over in Saskatchewan, which means that now your defensive coordinators is Kevin Eben and William Fields, right?
Kevin Eben and Will Fields,
Yep. So how would you rate their performance? Not necessarily comparing it to Corey Mace, but just in terms of their performance as a whole. I guess you can compare it to Corey Mace if you really want to.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall it's been quite well, because what we've seen so far this year is the strength of this Toronto Argonauts team, even with the departure of Mace, continues to be their defense. The Argonaut Blue Bombers game, for example, is a good example of that, where they were able
That's an all defense game.
Yeah, all defense, generate good turnovers when you needed to, put pressure, force long field goals for Castillo, the kind of things that you rely on your defense to hold on to and keep them in a game.
That defense kept them in that game. That defensive performance by Toronto is absolutely the reason they won that game, in the sense of, like, I mean, I guess you said this earlier, so I guess I don't have to be concerned, but I really felt like Winnipeg played the better game for a lot of that, and it was instances where they shot themselves in the foot, but it was also instances where Toronto's defense was really, it was like, if I'm an Argos fan and I'm watching this game, I'm thinking, like, I'm not going to lie, I'm getting frustrated with the offense. It's like, this defense is giving you everything. You have to do something. And so it was so frustrating It was so frustrating to deal with as a Bomber fan, but it was definitely, I'd say, it has been a very good asset for the Argonauts.
Yeah, definitely. So I find it hard to fault a lot on the D. And I mean, when you look at some of the losses that they had in the offseason, Darius Pickett was probably, I would say, was probably the biggest loss out of all of their positional groups. And combined with dealing with injuries like losing Jared Brinkman, now losing Winnie McManus, but that other guys have been able to step up. Fraser Sopik looked good 2 weeks ago. Royce Metche, of course, who I spoke about before. And then you have the return of guys like Priester and McFadden who have looked great. Deshaun Amos looked good. Yeah. So they've all been able to sort of find ways where now, like said at the beginning of the year, there were some questions about the secondary. That's pretty much all gone, and now there's a lot of faith in their coverage in the backfield to keep them in the games, and now more of the look is on how the offense can figure a way to move the ball down the field and score points, which they haven't really been doing the last couple games.
Yeah. Now, one thing I will ask is that, so the Argonauts, like we kind of mentioned earlier, they have dealt with a lot of injury problems similar to Winnipeg. Rick, are you able to actually pull up kind of what the current injury status is with the Argonauts? Who all is injured?
Yes.
What their status is? Standard injury list, 6-game.
So everyone that I'm about to mention are all on the 6-game. So Deshaun Brissett was just extended on the 6-game today. Okay. Quincy Moget, Jamie Harry, Jonathan. Come on, Nick. How do you pronounce this?
Edward.
Okay. Winton McManus with the toothpick. Darius Sirocco. Gregory McKellar. Daniel
Cuomo.
I wasn't even going to get that right. Tommy Neild. And then your favorite.
Cedric Hansen.
Cedric Hansen, your former Bomber.
Yep.
Jared Brinkman, who we had on the show a couple of weeks ago.
Yep.
And Jordan Williams.
The D lineman Jordan Williams, not the
linebacker
not the linebacker
that got traded to us and then decided to call it a career. Okay, so Nick, I have a question for you. I asked this to Alex Hurd last night. In the offseason, there was a big trade between you guys in Edmonton. Curly Gittins Jr. for Jake Ceresna.
Yeah.
Do you, if you're Pinball Clemens, do you remake that trade or no?
I am actually in the camp of I would remake that trade, and that's coming from someone who is a Laurier alumni as well, the same university that Curly Gittins came from. I would still make that trade again, and my reasoning for that is that, particularly if we're looking after the draft, you just drafted Kevin Mittal, who's probably the most CFL ready wide receiver. You got Richie Sindani. You've got David Ungerer. So you've got a good group of Canadian wide receivers deep enough that you can risk losing one. I mean, you lose like 4 to injury, and then we're talking a different story. But and you're getting one of the top defensive linemen, and particularly, it might not have been the thing that you can kind of foresee now with hindsight, but if you're going to lose guys like Sean Oakman, you're going to lose guys like the 2 who went to Hamilton.
There's like 4 or 5 that went to Hamilton.
Yeah, the defensive lineman.
Barlow and Hendricks.
Yeah.
And Knight. Yeah. Can't forget Knight.
Yeah, Barlow, Hendricks, and now Deontay Knight. Like it's making keeping or trading for Jake Ceresna looking like the better pick. And I even look at it now and I kind of think, even with the struggles that the offense is having, my thoughts are, do I think Jake Ceresna, is he having a bigger impact on the defense, or would Curly Gittins have a bigger impact on the offense in making them productive? And I think right now, Jake Ceresna, particularly when he's combined with Jared Brinkman, when they're on the field together, I think that's benefiting the team more. So that's how I look at it. So that's what I'm going to go with. I would make this trade again.
Alrighty, well.
And who would have thought that Kadeem Carey would have as good as the season than this year than what AJ's having this year? Because if you look at it, and we were talking with Coach Phil about this the other day, the difference between the Toronto offensive line and what Saskatchewan has are two different completely backs because AJ Ouellette is more of a pass block than he is a receiver back, which Kadeem Carey is.
Yeah.
And then you have
completely different style of running back.
Daniel Adnaboye and McMahon, who are kind of like not blocking backs like AJ was, but yet Kadeem Carey is still having that success in Toronto.
Yeah, I think what a lot of people kind of forgot because Carey was injured for a lot of last year and it was kind of a subpar year by his standards. He was the best running back in the league 2 years ago, and it's amazing how just 1 year of kind of added rest and moving to a new team, a new culture and environment, and just it's lit that spark up back in him to play well. And
absolutely.
Yeah, just kind of looking at the rest of the running back core in Toronto, what's been great about it is you have Carey, who's, like you said, not quite as much of a power back as Ouellette was. McMahon is definitely one of these small, speedy backs. A lot of the ways kind of like pinball in the fact that he's smaller than a lot of other running backs, but can use his speed to his advantage. And then Adnaboye is probably the most like Ouellette right now in terms of just a raw running back. And there were times in the Calgary game and in other times earlier in the season where they ran more to Adnaboye and let Kadeem Carey rest. So you've got sort of the three-headed hydra monster of different looks you can go with. And even sometimes just to throw them defenses off, we've seen them run the little Deontay McMahon up the gut unexpectedly and able to break a gain of 7, 10, 13 yards out of it. So yeah. It leads to a lot of creativity in their playbook, which is something as I really like to see out of offenses, that they're willing to take some risks and do some sort of unorthodox things rather than just the simple swing passes and screens and 5-yard hooks and boring things like that you see every team play.
Yeah. Well, even like one thing I was thinking about actually kind of as you were mentioning that is we had this conversation with Coach Phil. And we had this conversation, I think we had it as well with, I think it was Alex. I know we for sure had it with Coach Phil, though. And it was just regarding about how, like, having a good running back is very, very important. It is. However, what is equally as important is having a good offensive line that's able to complement that running back. As at the end of the day, you can have the greatest running back in the world, but if an O-line can't get a hole for nothing for this guy to run through, it means just nothing. And so yeah. I think this kind of goes back to what you were saying about the success that this Toronto Argonauts offensive line has been able to have. And so that's why any running back that gets brought into, I shouldn't say any running back, but when you bring in another running back who's very, very talented, even if his talents are kind of a different style of running back, because the fact of the matter is that when you have a power back like AJ Ouellette, you need to be, the hole's got to be a bit bigger. You got to stock your guy big tank that's going to come through and drive it right through the house. And the thing is that if you have an offensive line that's capable of getting it that wide, then that's plenty of room for Kadeem Carey. He's a smaller running back. He'll be able to make that work. And he has been able to. And again, I think it's very, very important as well that you mentioned that it wasn't too long ago where Kadeem Carey was the top running back in this league. And so now that he's kind of got another offensive line that he's able to work with, that's able to give him those opportunities to do what he does best, I think it's really brought out the best in Kadeem Carey.
Yeah, and I mean that's like my friend Chris brought up looking at the first Calgary game, is that they kind of went away from that running game in the second half where you have such a really strong run blocking offensive line that you need to continue to take advantage of it and exploit, so you have that ability to draw the defense in on a run block, where then you're able to run your pass plays out of it. By that second half, the Argonauts were showing pass pretty much the rest of the game, and it allowed the defenders to read on that. And there were times where they were still able to generate pressure with just a 3-man rush. So yeah, definitely in the even though you don't necessarily need it like you do in the NFL, CFL running backs, you need a good running game in order to make your play action and your passing plays better, which is why you sometimes can't abandon it early in the second half, even if you're down by a couple possessions.
Absolutely. Now, one thing I will say, I need to ask, I know he's been in the CFL forever. I think he just hit 1,000 points kicking. How the hell do you pronounce the name? I still struggle with it.
Okay, hold on. Let's see if I can pronounce this, because I just tried to use Google.
Uh-oh.
Hairu Lahu.
Yep. Lirim Hairu.
Hairu Lahu?
Yes, that is how Wikipedia pronounces it.
Lyram, gotcha. He's going by Lyram. That's what we're doing here. He's going by Lyram at the show. It's Liam with an R. That's all it is.
Yeah, you pretend the J isn't there, and it makes it a little bit easier to pronounce if you think of it like that.
Yeah. But I mean, he just hit 1,000 yards kicking in the CFL. Big accomplishment. And overall, what is your opinion being kind of on his performance this season, I'd say?
Yeah, no, I thought he's been solid. There was a lot of there's a little bit of fan disappointment when Boris Beatty went to Edmonton instead, because
I think that's gone now.
Yeah. The consistency of Haralau has been excellent, and like you even saw just how the game started. Like you question the power, and he starts the game getting a rouge through the end zone at the beginning of the game. So yeah, I think you've got a little bit more stability from a veteran, not only in the CFL. I believe he's played for Toronto 2 stints now, and I believe he also played for Hamilton and Winnipeg.
Yes, I don't have him here on Winnipeg. I don't, or actually, he was a punter in Winnipeg.
He played in Winnipeg in 2014, went to Toronto in 2016, joined Hamilton in 2018, left for the NFL for the Rams in 2020, joined Carolina in late 2020. Joined the Cowboys in 21.
When you say Carolina, you're talking about the Carolina.
This is all NFL.
This is all NFL. I'm just confirming, just because.
And then the Washington football team, as they were called back in 21, their practice squad. Then they went back to Carolina Panthers. Then the Cowboys spent last season with the Philadelphia Stars in the USFL, and now he's back in Toronto.
Yeah, I mean he's been around, so he's seen football in all shapes and sizes in the Canada and the United States. So that's what just kind of makes the story all the more crazy, that now he's come back to Toronto and is doing a stellar job. And I mean, I can extend that to the whole special teams core as a whole. Mickey Donovan has done an excellent and outstanding job with these guys, from Lirim's accuracy on kickoffs and field goals. John Haggerty, I heard his average is right now the best of any Toronto punter with 45 yards average. But this last game, he averaged more than 60 yards, and his shortest kick was with the wind, because he was doing one of those the Aussie kind of drop kick to backspin it in there. So he's been excellent. We've had no questions with Adam Guillemette and his long snapping since we drafted him 2 years ago. And then, of course, Janarian Grant already has 3 touchdowns on special teams this year. So it's like, what more could you want?
It's funny. I thought he got 4.
Maybe. Yeah, I'd have to double check.
I'd have to double check too. You probably know it better than me, so it's probably 3. However, one thing I will say is that the pieces are there. There's even though they lost a decent amount of talent, it's one of those things where going kind of back to where we were before was just kind of talking about how this is an offense that was designed for Chad Kelly, that was built for Chad Kelly, and Cameron Dukes did what he could with that. Nick Arbuckle will go in this week. and you'll have to see if he's able to pick up a win against Calgary or if he's not. I think honestly, it was one of those things where that game, it's kind of flip of a coin, sort of, in terms of both teams have had very, very similar problems, in my opinion, in terms of inconsistencies here or there.
Yeah, definitely
But
Calgary.
then, like, the thing is that let's say Chad Kelly comes back, and he comes back at the assumed kind of timeline, doesn't play this game, but comes back and is ready for the following game. I would be shocked if he wasn't already doing some level of training, even though it's not with the team, obviously. He's like, I mean, he's releasing hype videos about like how he's coming back. So like how quickly do you think they immediately gel back with Chad Kelly, or do you think it takes a game for them to get used to it again? And then at that point we see the Argonauts maybe able to kind of turn their season and really get it into overdrive.
Yeah, so with them coming back, they'll be playing at home to Saskatchewan during the CNE game. So I think a little context there might be worth noting. Because
yes, that is absolutely worth noting.
Yeah, Corey Mace, a defensive specialist, and of course former Argonauts coach. So you wonder about that taking a factor into things. And yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't have. He's probably not going to go out there and throw 450 yards and throw 6 touchdowns or anything crazy like that. But if he can have a good outing and even, put up 250 yards, get 2 or 3 touchdowns, even just 2, and just kind of provide some stable drives that they're able to march down the field, even if it leads to a couple of Haralalu field goals. Like if it's like with Winnipeg there against BC and they kick 6 field goals even and can't finish drives, but are able to just get down there, that's going to be a huge accomplishment for a guy who hasn't played at football game speed in 9 weeks now. And yeah, just speaking on sort of the training and stuff, he's 100% been practicing and doing strength conditioning training and all that kind of stuff. So like he's not just sitting on his couch eating potato chips watching the games on TV. He's putting all the work in that's necessary, along with the class work that he needs to do to pass. And as from what we understood, like at the beginning of training camp, he could have been taking reps at camp as long as he wanted to, and there was nothing that restricted him from being there at team practice. It was because of the fan backlash, and I guess in part the realization that if he's not going to be able to play, he shouldn't really be taking first string reps then if it can help someone like Dukes or Arbuckle who's going to fill in.
Yeah.
It just to me seems more logical that you let him do his thing. And now that we're getting kind of that week, I think because of the ambiguity behind it, the one thing is the Argos don't want to make any move where if they bring him back to full practice, let's say, and they don't want the league to be like, oh no, you can't do that.
No, this needs to be. I think it was Dinwiddie making sure he has already kind of tried to get in contact with the league regarding this, as I think with kind of how delicate the situation is, I think it's very, very important that Toronto doesn't cut any steps out, and they don't try to take any shortcuts with this. At the end of the day, if the league says, listen, you can have him back, but it's going to be an extra week, an extra 2 weeks, whatever it is, just soak it. That's the best way you can if you want any chance of Chad Kelly coming back. Because it's one of those things where naturally after kind of the situation, and I'm not going to dive into that too deep.
Yeah.
There was a lot of mistrust people had for the Argonauts organization. And so it's one of those things where anything that could give them reason to get the pitchforks back out, just don't want that.
Yeah, and it's tough because I hate it because football is a team with there's 45 players. There's another 10 on the practice roster in the CFL. There's a dozen members of the coaching staff, trainers, and all that. And we're looking at the actions of one guy that's impacting the entirety of the team. And unfortunately, like you look.
To be fair, I think there's a fair distinction between the organization, upper management, and how they deal with things as opposed to the team. I don't think people were really that upset with the team, like in terms of the players. I think it was probably more upper management.
Yeah, but unfortunately, to take that out on what's been really growing in the Argonaut culture the last couple seasons, it's definitely a huge step back. So
Absolutely.
yeah, it's tough. So I'm hoping that just now that we're getting closer to him coming back, we can kind of move on from it and
oh,
focus
absolutely.
on
And I think good news here is that, like, in terms of Chad Kelly and in terms of, like, he's coming back, he's coming soon. I haven't seen anything in terms of this widespread kind of like outrage and problematic, and that's exactly the way you want to keep it if you're Toronto and you want to be able to, you know, live and learn essentially for the way things that are managed. And so kind of looking into the games that they have going forward, kind of getting back towards the team thing, because I didn't want to go crazy long on that. If we're just kind of talking about the games they have coming up, obviously they play Calgary again. And that would be their game this week, week 10. This game would have already happened by the time this comes out. So hopefully for your guys' sake, they win. And for my sake too, please beat Calgary. I need Calgary to lose. And then going into week 11, you guys have a bye week. Then week 12, you play Saskatchewan. Again, this is the Touchdown Atlantic. Or not Touchdown Atlantic.
No, not anymore. It's CNE game.
The CNE game.
But that's actually a good point you brought up, though, with that, because having the bye week before Saskatchewan means, assuming he's cleared to play, that might give Chad a whole extra week to take grabs.
Yeah. So there's that game, and then the very following week, you guys are in Hamilton. It's Labor Day. So a few very, very important games coming up. And actually, me and Rick were talking about this with Elks Herd, that we think that most likely what's probably going to happen is all this kicking game, these kicking games are going to continue until Labor Day. And Labor Day is where all that changes and we get back to a very, very offensive focused games with 3 rivalry games all on the same night. So I'm excited to see that.
It's also the first day game, I think, for the Argonauts this year. And I think it kind of kicks off the return to having more of those day games on the schedule as the NFL starts getting underway and all that.
And also this is going to be really important because like a lot of games that are left now are games within the divisions, with East teams playing East teams, West teams playing West teams. And so I think it'll be all the more important, which I think will kind of will elevate the football as it'll get to a point where these games are going to dramatically affect the standings.
Yeah, like looking at Toronto in particular, this is Labor Day game's the second game in Hamilton and potentially the decider for the Harold Ballard Trophy between the two if Hamilton wins. And then the last game is in Toronto a few weeks later. The one I really want to point out is we have not played Ottawa yet, and Ottawa is ahead of us in the standings. Those are the games I'm particularly keen on because Ottawa has a really good record right now, but there's a lot of people who doubt that Ottawa's record is really truly as reflective on how good of a team they are.
Yeah.
Particularly with some of the teams, like they've played Edmonton twice, and I think they've
played us once.
They've played Hamilton once.
We're 1-1 against Ottawa.
Yeah, Bombers twice. I don't think they've played Montreal or Toronto.
No, they lost to Montreal once.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so like they haven't really played any of what would be considered kind of the top teams. They haven't played Toronto. They've only played Montreal once. They haven't played BC yet. So those are the kind of things that I'm really curious as we get later on, because we are sitting well behind Montreal now with the added losses. But it could be neck and neck between us and Ottawa, and I definitely don't want to be on the road for both the East Semi and the East Final. If we can at least be in the East Semi, I'm okay with that, but you definitely don't want to be on the road for potentially both games if you were to win the East Semis.
So, Carter, I was just looking at the schedule. If you include this week's game, they have 5 West games, 5 East games left. So I have 10 games altogether, 5 against West teams.
I see.
Yeah.
So now before we get into kind of the letter grades to kind of almost wrap this up, is there anything else that you want to kind of get into, Rick, before we get, because I feel like that's a good way to close that when we get to the letter grades.
So did we just do like predictions on where we thought that they were going to finish?
We did not do that, so we can still do that. Is there anything? Is there any input you want to have?
No, it's just that was the only thing that I was going to bring up.
Oh, okay, yeah, go for it.
Okay, so based on what you've seen so far, do you have Toronto finishing third, like even if so you have 10 games left, even if you go 500, that still puts you at 9-9 on the season. Obviously, with Chad Kelly coming in at some point, they will have probably more of a winning season than they have losing. But where do you see them finishing the season?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think they're gonna be. I don't want to put the pressure or expectation that they're gonna, with Chad Kelly coming in, they're gonna go like 9-1 or something, and go on that kind of a tear. I'm hoping that they can be above 500. Like if they're, even if it's just by 1 or 2 games, if they're nine, was it 9-8 or like something along those lines.
I think they split with Ottawa. I think each team takes one out of that, I will say, with their matchup later on. So at that point in terms of tiebreaker, I think it'll come down to points and who's able to win by more, kind of similar to a Winnipeg-Calgary sense.
Yeah, I certainly think they can at least finish third, and third in which you negate the crossover and it's like a Toronto Ottawa matchup, and then the winner goes to Montreal. I don't think between Calgary and Winnipeg and Edmonton right now, I don't think any of them will be able to raise their records enough that it's going to cause that extra win shift in the West to cause a West team to cross.
If there is, I think it's most likely the only scenario where I see a West team crossing over to the East is if Toronto doesn't get going and they're not able to get on that run that they need. Winnipeg kicks it up a gear. Calgary stays mid. Winnipeg, Calgary tiebreaker then makes Calgary come across. I think that's the only situation. I'm not saying that's likely. I'm saying that is, if there is a world in which we have a West crossed over to the East, that is why. And I think if it happens, it's narrow margins.
Yeah, and you don't think it's Ottawa that could be the team that starts to come in back into a hole?
It's one of those things. This is a team, like Ottawa is a team that has had tons of talent for so long. They just have never been able to do anything with it, and they're now starting to flourish, and there's still guys on that squad that I think are kind of underperforming based on their potential. And so I think there's still more that they can do, but it's also possible that it falls apart. So this could go either way. Again, with Chad Kelly coming in to Toronto, if Toronto sweeps Ottawa 2 straight, that could spell trouble for the Red Blacks. And so this league is so effing hard to predict. Especially this season. This season has been crazy in terms of teams winning that you did not expect.
See, I want to see Ottawa play some of the top teams and have their starters in before I say that they're a top team.
Yeah.
Like, I want to see him play against Trevor Harris, him play against...
See, my answer is Ottawa is a top team? like with question mark?
I mean,
they
have the best defense by 1 point. But I mean, like... Again, they've only played the lower half of the teams. They haven't played Saskatchewan yet. They haven't played BC yet. They lost to Montreal. They haven't played Toronto, even if they do have Chad Kelly in. So, I mean, by the time you play all those teams, they could be third, if not, who knows, they could be fourth for all we know.
That would have to be quite a drop in order for them to drop out of a playoff spot.
I mean, I honestly don't see them beating Saskatchewan. I don't see them beating Montreal. And if Vernon Adams comes back and plays the way that he has, I don't see them beating BC.
I don't see them. I don't see them losing all of those, though. I see them winning at least one out of those.
I mean, my bias as an Argos fan definitely makes me think I think Toronto's a better team than Ottawa right now. But
it's a Drew Brown train, baby. It's a Drew Brown train. Just keeps rolling.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. So
all you got to do is
this year.
All you got to do is get in that head of Tommy Condell, and
there you go. Rick hates Tommy and his screen passes. I'm sure you've given Nick an earful.
I can't stand Tom. I still can't stand him with a passion. But based on expectations, what type of letter grade would you give Toronto so far?
Good question. Right now, I'd probably give them being 500. I'll probably give them just probably either a C or a C plus. There's some things that have gone well for them, particularly on the defensive side and the special teams. But then there's also been just a lot of mistakes and some sort of lackluster offensive production that's kept them from being a top team like they were last year.
Yeah.
But I also think a C is fair because I don't want to entirely give up hope. Because of the way they've lost a lot of these games by some razor thin margins. Like even the Montreal game, they lost decently, but they didn't get like smoked by 40 points or anything.
Yeah.
So that's why I kind of think there's still the potential there that at any moment that they can kind of turn it on. It might not even take Chad Kelly if Arbuckle manages to have a really good game this week. Again, looking in hindsight when it airs, but yeah, so it's just those little things that they need that could make them a B team. They haven't lost by much, which could have kept them above 500, and I can definitely see that they have the potential to get back up there in the second half of the season. So I think C is fair right now, and sort of my hope is that come the end of the season as we get into the playoffs, I
Yeah.
think they could still be the second place. I think being the second place team in the East would be the spot to shoot for at the moment.
It's funny. I actually am giving them, I think, actually a bit of a more generous grade than that. I'm going to give them a B minus. And the reason I'm giving them a B minus is because right now they're mid and inconsistent. But the thing is that when it comes to expectations, we knew that Chad Kelly was going to be gone for the first 9-10 weeks. And I don't have faith in Nick Arbuckle to carry this team. And I have minimal faith in Cameron Dukes. And so all things considered, and again, a team that was pretty ravaged through free agency. All things considered, I'll give them a B minus compared to expectations, as I didn't expect that much compared to where they are right now. And so B minus, just very much middle of the road. Just not really too shocking of a result in terms of their season so far for me. So, Rick?
I'm gonna say probably around a C plus.
Okay, fair
because with the offensive line that they had last year, and like Nick said, they've lost one person, and Cameron Dukes has been sacked 22 times this year. Like if you don't have a good offense, your defense is going to be on the field way too long, and then it's just like you guys have to play from catch up. And let's be honest, how many games have they lost where they could have won? Like the game against Hamilton, had they have not gotten that penalty on that last play, that offside, and then they didn't realize that the clock was running.
Yeah.
Again, poor time management. And then there's a couple of games where you guys lost by like a field goal, and then it's like
the Saskatchewan game and then the Calgary game there last week.
Yeah.
Looking at the sacks, I would like to go back and like if I could get the 20 sack plays like on a film reel back to back, I would be interested in seeing how long, like from the snap, Cam Dukes held the ball to when he was being sacked, because there were at least a couple in the Calgary game where I thought I counted at least 4 seconds. Like for most quarterbacks in the CFL, it should be plenty of time, like you kind of talked about with Nathan Rourke.
Let's say that's not even CFL. 4 seconds is a lot of time for any quarterback.
So to not be able to get it off by then, it makes you wonder: is it really the old line's fault at that point?
No.
Or is it on?
Yeah. No. I'll give you a direct answer. As a former offensive lineman myself, no. If you can't find someone in 4 seconds and you see the pocket falling apart, because I mean, of course it is. We can't hold everyone back forever. At that point, you either got to find someone, you got to find your running back in the flats, or you got to throw that right out of bounds and you got to go on the next down. So
I just hope Cam Dukes is all right, because I know he's game time decision for the second.
Oh yeah, no, health wise, I don't wish any injury upon anyone. So health wise, I hope he's kicking around well.
It does make you wonder a little bit if maybe that's why he wasn't so keen on tucking and running.
It also could just be, it's one of those things where it's like, do you think, like, I'll put it this way, before all the Chad Kelly stuff, there's no way Cameron Dukes was going into this season being like, all right, I'm starting, let's see how this goes. He was put into that position. That was not a position that he chose. You know what I mean? This was forced upon him, and that's a lot of pressure to put on his back. Starting quarterback gone for half the season, you got to carry the team. That's so much pressure, and so expecting him to play the exact same is kind of unreasonable, to be honest. So it wouldn't shock me if that's got in the way of his judgment. So yeah.
How much time do we have left?
I mean, we don't have any. I don't have. Zoom.
We have 5 minutes left.
Oh, so, he's giving us the
before we do our sign off.
Yeah.
I'm gonna give a shout out to Argo Ginger. Anyone that goes to any Argo games or that sees them on the road, go and buy. There you go.
There you go.
A CFL Fights cancer patch. I got a couple of them myself. And good old. He's probably gonna hate me because I always butcher his last name. If you go to Sauve Connor on Twitter to join our fight, Connor and a few other people are going to be doing the walk from BMO Field to Tim Hortons on the Saturday before Labor Day, and I'm going to be joining in at some point on that walk too.
And that is a long.
You guys will probably walk by me in Clarkson, like in Mississauga, so I'll have to stay in touch when you guys come walking by there.
Yeah.
Well, if I get my 1 minute of fame to plug in whatever I want,
I
will plug in our awesome season ticket holder gift that the Toronto Argonauts gave to us. They gave us all for each ticket. You get a football, and it's got all the logos for the history of the team on it, and of course all the Grey Cups and their dates listed along there, which is a pretty fantastic gift.
I miss my last season ticket gift, which we got, which was this right here.
I've got a couple of those lying around.
Oh, I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
I got Rick.
So do I.
His right there. I got a full set kicking around here.
Oh, just shut up with your full set.
Nice.
Also, don't forget to check out Nick and his co-host Chris
on Argo Bounce.
Pame on Argo Bounce.
Argo Bounce. And it's funny. I was talking with Nick before about this. That podcast is everywhere. It's on X. It's on Spotify. They're probably on TikTok. They're everywhere. So, if you're on a platform, you search Argo Bounce and you can't find it, odds are the next platform you try has it. So there you go.
Even if you go all the way to Atlanta, you can't escape us, because his show is on WQEE radio in Atlanta, Georgia. So exactly. Give full credit to Chris for doing all the marketing and promotion stuff, because if it's anything that could possibly host a podcast show, it's probably on there.
I'll need Nick. I'll need you to send me all the links, and all the links that Nick does send me will be in the description below, so you guys can check him out through those. And I think that is all we have. Is there anything else that we have here, Nick?
No, I'm just watching the
Rick and Nick.
I'm just watching the Saskatchewan Ottawa game in the background.
Oh, there we go. Well, in that case,
Shea Patterson's already 3 for 3 for 20 yards.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, geez, I forgot there was another game on today. I usually have it on in the corner, but I left it off for you guys.
There you go. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Nick. We appreciate you giving us your time. Again, guys, make sure you guys go check out Argo Bounce. Link to all that stuff in the description below. Thank you all so much for watching. Leave a like if you haven't already. Share this video around. Hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, because if you don't, I will be mildly upset. So please do so, and have yourselves a wonderful rest of your day. Peace, love, and positivity, and we'll see you guys next time.